Hey guys, tonight we're exploring what Princess Margaret's life was really like. Behind the Crown, a story of royal luxury, impossible love, and the hidden cost of living inside Britain's most famous family. If you enjoy relaxing history that helps you unwind before sleep, please subscribe to the channel and join me for more journeys into the past. From the outside, Princess Margaret seemed to have everything anyone could dream of. She lived in magnificent palaces, attended glittering parties, wore priceless jewels, and met presidents, movie stars, and the wealthiest people in the world. Newspapers followed her every move, and millions believed she lived a perfect fairy tale life. Yet, behind the sparkling gowns and royal ceremonies existed a woman whose future had already been decided long before she became an adult. Every smile she gave in public represented another reminder that her personal wishes often came second to the expectations of the British monarchy. As the younger sister of Queen Elizabeth II, Margaret always understood that she would never wear the crown herself, but she would spend her entire life helping protect it. Even as a little girl, she learned that ordinary freedoms were simply not available to someone born into the royal family, while other children could dream about becoming whatever they wished. Margaret's path had already been carefully planned. She was expected to behave perfectly, speak carefully, dress elegantly, and never embarrass the institution she represented. Tutors, servants, guards, and royal advisors surrounded her daily life, creating a world filled with privilege but surprisingly little privacy. Every holiday, every friendship, and every public appearance followed strict traditions that had existed for generations. As she grew older, Margaret developed a lively personality that contrasted sharply with the calm and disciplined nature of her older sister. She loved music, dancing, fashionable clothing, and long evenings filled with conversation and laughter. Friends admired her sharp sense of humour and natural charm, qualities that made her one of the most fascinating members of the royal family. But those same qualities also attracted endless attention from photographers and journalists, ensuring that almost every decision she made became tomorrow's headline. As Margaret entered adulthood, one relationship would define the rest of her life. During royal events, she grew close to Peter Townsend, or respected Royal Air Force officer who had served the crown faithfully for years. He was kind, intelligent, and understood the pressures of palace life better than most people around her. For the first time, Margaret felt she had found someone who saw her not simply as a princess, but as an ordinary young woman searching for happiness. Their affection slowly became impossible to hide, and rumours soon spread throughout Britain. Many ordinary citizens sympathised with the couple, believing love should come before tradition. Unfortunately, royal life rarely allowed simple endings. Peter was divorced, and during the 1950s, the Church of England and the British establishment strongly opposed a royal marriage to someone with a living former spouse. Palace officials worried that approving such a marriage could damage both the monarchy and the church. Suddenly, Margaret found herself facing an impossible choice. She could marry the man she loved and sacrifice many of her royal privileges, or remain a princess while giving up the future she truly wanted. Every newspaper waited for her decision, while politicians, church leaders, and advisors debated her future behind closed doors. The pressure became overwhelming. Imagine knowing that millions of strangers were discussing the most personal decision of your life. After months of uncertainty, Margaret released a public statement announcing that she would not marry Peter Townsend. She declared that she had chosen duty above personal happiness, fully aware that the decision would break both their hearts. Around the world, many readers described the announcement as one of the saddest royal love stories of the 20th century. Although she continued smiling during ceremonies and public appearances. Close friends later recalled that the experience deeply changed her. It taught Margaret that being born into royalty often meant surrendering the ordinary freedoms that most people never even think about. From that moment forward, the glamorous image presented to the public began hiding a growing sense of loneliness, while crowds admired the sparkling tiaras and elegant dresses. Very few realized that the woman wearing them had already sacrificed the greatest love of her life in order to protect the institution she had been born to serve. A few years later, Princess Margaret hoped she had finally found a chance to build the happy family life she had always imagined. She married the talented photographer Anthony Armstrong-Jones, a creative man whose confidence and modern personality seemed very different from the formal world of the royal court. Their wedding in 1960 became an international event watched by millions of people on television. Newspapers called it the perfect royal romance, and for a brief moment it appeared that Margaret had left her earlier heartbreak behind. The newlyweds moved into Kensington Palace, entertained famous actors, musicians, writers, and politicians, and became symbols of style during London's exciting cultural revolution of the 1960s. Their glamorous dinners, elegant fashion, and fashionable circle of friends fascinated photographers around the world. To the public, they represented younger, more modern image of royalty, but appearances rarely revealed the whole truth. As the years passed, cracks slowly began to appear beneath the polished surface. Anthony often devoted long hours to his photography career, while Margaret struggled with the constant attention that followed every royal engagement. They both enjoyed exciting social lives, yet the demands of public duty left little room for an ordinary marriage. Rumours of arguments, long periods apart, and growing emotional distance quietly spread through London's newspapers. Every disagreement became another headline, making it nearly impossible for either of them to solve personal problems in private. Unlike most couples, they could never simply disappear for a peaceful weekend without cameras waiting nearby. Even family holidays attracted photographers hoping to capture a single uncomfortable expression. The pressure slowly transformed everyday difficulties into national conversations. Margaret sometimes escaped to the Caribbean island of Mustique, where she could briefly experience something resembling normal life away from palace walls. There she laughed more freely, relaxed with close friends, and enjoyed warm evenings without endless royal schedules. Yet, even those peaceful moments could not completely silence the expectations attached to her title Eventually, the marriage deteriorated beyond repair, ending in divorce after years of unhappiness. It became the first divorce involving such a senior member of the British royal family in generations, shocking many people who had once believed their relationship would last forever. Despite the sadness, Margaret continued carrying out official engagements with remarkable determination. She visited charities, attended ceremonies, welcomed foreign guests, and fulfilled countless royal responsibilities while quietly dealing with personal disappointment. The glamorous photographs published across magazines still showed elegant gowns, sparkling diamonds, and confident smiles. But behind every carefully posed image stood a woman who understood that public admiration could never replace genuine peace or lasting happiness. As the decades passed, the glamorous image that had once defined Princess Margaret slowly began to fade. The endless parties became less frequent. Many of her closest friends grew older, and the excitement that had surrounded her youth was gradually replaced by quieter days inside royal residences. Yet the newspapers never completely lost interest in her. Even the smallest public appearance could generate headlines, reminding Margaret that life inside the royal family never truly belonged to the individual living it. Unlike celebrities who could retire from the spotlight whenever they wished, a princess remained a princess every single day. Royal duty was not simply a career that ended at sunset. It shaped every conversation, every holiday, every friendship, and every decision for an entire lifetime. Margaret also faced increasing health problems as she grew older. Years of smoking and a demanding lifestyle affected her well-being, leading to several serious illnesses. She underwent medical treatment, experienced strokes, and found many activities she once loved becoming more difficult. Walking through palace gardens, attending long ceremonies, or greeting hundreds of guests required far more strength than before. Still, whenever possible, she continued representing the crown with quiet determination. Those who worked closely with her often spoke about her resilience, noting that even during difficult periods she rarely complained in public. Behind palace doors, however, the reality was far more complicated than photographs could ever show. Royal tradition encouraged dignity above all else, meaning personal suffering was usually hidden behind a composed expression. Margaret understood this expectation better than almost anyone. Looking back today, historians often describe her life as one filled with remarkable contrasts. She experienced unimaginable privilege while longing for ordinary freedom. She met the world's most influential people while struggling to make deeply personal choices for herself. She possessed magnificent homes, priceless jewels, and international fame. Yet she repeatedly discovered that wealth and status could never guarantee happiness. Her story reminds us that titles do not protect people from loneliness, disappointment, or heartbreak. In many ways, Princess Margaret became one of the first modern royals whose private struggles unfolded before the entire world. The public watched her celebrate, fall in love, marry, separate, grow older, and battle illness, often forgetting that behind every newspaper photograph stood a real human being carrying invisible burdens. Perhaps that is why her story continues to fascinate people today. It is not simply the story of a princess surrounded by luxury. It is the story of a woman searching for love, identity, and peace while living beneath the enormous weight of a crown she would never wear, but would spend her entire life protecting. During the final years of her life, Princess Margaret spent much more time reflecting than celebrating. The glamorous evenings that had once filled newspaper headlines became distant memories, replaced by quieter moments with family, trusted friends, and the familiar surroundings of royal homes. Britain itself was changing rapidly, and so was the monarchy. New generations of royals stepped into the spotlight, bringing different expectations and challenges. Margaret watched these changes with the unique perspective of someone who had spent her entire life inside the institution. She had witnessed wars, coronations, political transformations, and enormous cultural shifts. Yet one thing had remained constant: the responsibility that came with being born into the royal family. She understood better than almost anyone that the crown demanded patience, sacrifice, and an acceptance that personal desires could never completely come first. As historians look back today, many believe Margaret's experiences quietly influenced the generations that followed. Her difficult romance with Peter Townsend sparked national conversations about whether members of the royal family should have greater freedom to choose whom they loved. Years later, public attitudes toward marriage, divorce, and the monarchy changed dramatically. Some historians even suggest that Margaret's heartbreak helped begin discussions that slowly modernized royal traditions. While she could not change the rules during her own youth, her story encouraged later generations to question whether those rules should remain unchanged forever. Despite her struggles, Margaret also possessed remarkable warmth and generosity. People who met her privately often remembered her quick wit, contagious laughter, and ability to make formal gatherings feel surprisingly relaxed. She appreciated music, theatre, art, and talented performers, supporting many cultural organisations throughout her life. These quieter contributions rarely received as much attention as the dramatic headlines surrounding her personal relationships, but they formed an important part of her legacy. When Princess Margaret passed away in 2002, many newspapers remembered her as one of the most fascinating and complicated members of the modern royal family. Some focused on her glamorous lifestyle, others on her romances or controversies. But beneath every story lay the same simple truth. She had lived a life unlike almost anyone else, filled with extraordinary privilege, but also extraordinary limitations. Her journey reminds us that history is rarely just about kings, queens, or grand palaces. It is also about human emotions that remain timeless: love that cannot be forgotten, dreams that cannot always be fulfilled, ends are quiet, strength required to continue moving forward even after life refuses to follow the path we once imagined. That combination of elegance, sacrifice, and resilience is what makes Princess Margaret's story continue to captivate people around the world, even decades after her final public appearance. Perhaps the most surprising part of Princess Margaret's story is how different public memory can be from reality. Many people remember only the glamorous photographs, the sparkling tiaras, the elegant gowns, and the luxurious royal residences. They picture a princess surrounded by servants, priceless artwork, and magnificent banquets, assuming that such a life must have been free from ordinary worries. History, however, tells a much more complicated story. Behind every carefully staged portrait stood someone who constantly balanced personal feelings against public responsibility. Every appearance required perfect manners. Every speech was carefully prepared, and every expression could be examined by millions of people. Even moments that should have belonged only to family were often interrupted by photographers waiting outside palace gates. Imagine never being able to make a mistake without the entire country discussing it the following morning. That was simply a normal part of Margaret's daily existence. She belonged not only to herself, but also to history, tradition, and the expectations of an entire nation. Modern readers sometimes compare her experiences with those of celebrities, but the comparison is incomplete. A celebrity can step away from fame, change careers, or move somewhere quiet. A princess cannot stop being a princess. The title follows every conversation, every friendship, and every stage of life. Margaret carried that responsibility from childhood until her final days. She was expected to preserve centuries of tradition while living in a rapidly changing world where society increasingly valued personal freedom over old customs. That conflict made her life especially difficult. She stood between two different eras, one shaped by strict royal rules and another demanding greater independence. Looking back now, historians often describe Princess Margaret as one of the monarchy's most human figures because her struggles feel surprisingly familiar. Despite her extraordinary circumstances, she wanted lasting love, meaningful friendships, personal happiness, and the freedom to choose her own future. Desires shared by people everywhere, regardless of wealth or status. Yet her birth into the royal family placed invisible walls around many of those dreams. Perhaps that is why her story continues to resonate decades later. It reminds us that luxury cannot erase disappointment. Titles cannot guarantee contentment. And public admiration cannot replace genuine peace of mind. Long after the newspaper headlines faded and the royal celebrations ended, what remained was the story of a woman who tried to live with dignity inside a world where nearly every important choice carried consequences far greater than most people could ever imagine. Today, visitors walking through royal palaces often admire the beautiful rooms, polished furniture, glittering chandeliers, and priceless paintings without realizing how many emotional stories unfolded behind those historic walls. Every grand staircase, elegant ballroom, and private sitting room witnessed moments of celebration, disappointment, hope, and heartbreak. Princess Margaret's life reminds us that history is not created only by famous speeches or dramatic political events. Sometimes history is shaped quietly through personal sacrifices that never appear in official records. Countless letters remained private. Many conversations were never recorded, and some emotions were carried silently for decades. That silence became part of Margaret's character. She understood that members of the royal family were expected to protect the institution above themselves, even when doing so required enormous personal strength. In many ways, She belonged to the last generation of royals, raised under extremely strict expectations long before modern ideas about openness and personal independence transformed public life. If she had been born several decades later, historians often wonder whether her story might have unfolded very differently. Perhaps she would have enjoyed greater freedom to marry the person she loved, live more privately, and make decisions based on personal happiness rather than constitutional tradition. Of course, history cannot be rewritten. We can only understand the world as it existed during her lifetime. That is one reason her story remains so fascinating. It offers a window into a period when duty carried extraordinary weight and individual desires were often expected to yield to the needs of the monarchy. Even after her passing, documentaries, biographies, and historical studies continue, examining her life because she represented something larger than a single princess. She symbolized the complicated relationship between tradition and freedom, privilege and responsibility, public admiration and private loneliness. Each generation discovers something new in her journey. Some see a tragic love story. Others see a woman trapped by outdated rules, while many simply see a human being trying to find happiness inside circumstances she never chose for herself. As we quietly leave Margaret's world behind, it becomes easier to understand that history is rarely black and white. People can be fortunate and unhappy at the same time. They can possess extraordinary wealth while longing for ordinary experiences. They can smile before millions while carrying invisible burdens that no camera could ever capture. Princess Margaret's life gently reminds us that behind every royal portrait hangs a deeply personal story, one filled not only with crowns and ceremonies but also with hopes, regret, courage, and the timeless search for a life that truly feels one's own. One lesson quietly echoes throughout Princess Margaret's entire life. It is easy to admire people from a distance while knowing almost nothing about the burdens they carry. Millions of people envied her position, imagining that every day inside a palace felt magical. Few realized that even simple pleasures could become complicated when every action represented the monarchy, choosing where to travel, whom to meet, what to say, or even how to react during emotional moments often required careful consideration. Privacy, something most people take for granted, became one of the rarest luxuries in Margaret's world. Even during peaceful afternoons, photographers could be waiting beyond palace gates, hoping to capture a single image that would appear across newspapers the following morning. That constant attention slowly shaped the way she lived, encouraging caution even in moments meant only for family and close friends. Yet despite these pressures, Margaret never completely lost the qualities that made people enjoy her company. Those who knew her personally often described her as warm, witty, intelligent, and wonderfully entertaining. She loved telling stories, appreciated beautiful music, admired talented artists, and could fill a quiet room with laughter through a clever remark. These moments rarely appeared in official royal records, but they survived in the memories of people fortunate enough to spend time with her away from cameras. They remembered not only a princess but also a woman with curiosity, humour, and genuine kindness. As the years passed, Britain itself changed dramatically. Public expectations toward the royal family became less rigid, and younger generations questioned traditions that earlier generations had accepted without hesitation. Looking back, many historians now view Margaret as someone caught between two worlds. She belonged to an older royal system built upon discipline and sacrifice, while secretly longing for the personal freedom that later generations would increasingly enjoy. Perhaps that is why her story still feels surprisingly modern. Even today, people continue balancing family expectations, career responsibilities, public image, and personal happiness. The details may differ, but the emotions remain familiar. Princess Margaret's journey reminds us that every historical figure was first a human being with dreams, fears, disappointments, and hopes. Behind the jewels, uniforms, crowns, and magnificent ceremonies stood an ordinary heart searching for love and understanding. That timeless human truth has allowed her story to endure long. After the music faded from royal ballrooms and the newspaper headlines disappeared, leaving behind not simply the memory of a princess, but the lasting portrait of a woman whose greatest struggles could never be measured by the grandeur surrounding her. As historians continue studying Princess Margaret's life, they often reach the same conclusion. Her greatest legacy is not found in royal jewels, Grand Palace or photographs. Instead, it lives in the conversations her story continues to inspire about duty, freedom, love, and personal sacrifice. Every generation asks the same question. Should tradition always come before happiness? Margaret never offered a simple answer, but her experiences revealed how difficult that choice could become when an entire nation watched every decision. Unlike fictional fairy tales that end with a perfect wedding and a happily ever after, real history is filled with complicated lives and imperfect endings. Margaret's story reflects that reality. She experienced moments of extraordinary joy alongside periods of profound sadness, reminding us that no human life can be understood through headlines alone. During public ceremonies, she stood with confidence beneath sparkling chandeliers, greeting world leaders and representing centuries of royal tradition. Yet once the applause ended and the cameras disappeared, she returned to the same private thoughts and emotions that every person experiences. She worried about family, reflected on the past, celebrated small victories, and carried memories that never completely faded. Perhaps that is why people continue reading books and watching documentaries about her decades after her passing. They are searching not only for facts about royalty, but also for a deeper understanding of the person behind the title. Princess Margaret's journey teaches us to look beyond appearances. Wealth does not erase loneliness. Privilege does not eliminate regret. And public admiration cannot replace genuine companionship. History often remembers kings and queens because of the nations they ruled, but it also remembers individuals like Margaret because they reveal something timeless about the human experience. Her life encourages us to treat historical figures with compassion rather than judgment, recognizing that they faced challenges shaped by the customs and expectations of their own era. It is easy to imagine different choices with modern values, yet far more meaningful to understand the world as they actually lived it. In doing so, we gain a richer picture not only of Princess Margaret, but also of the society that surrounded her. Her story becomes more than royal history. It becomes a quiet reminder that behind every famous name is a person whose happiest moments, deepest disappointments, and greatest hopes were every bit as real as our own. And perhaps that understanding is the most valuable lesson history can offer, inviting us to see the past not as a collection of distant events, but as the lives of people whose emotions still echo across time. Another reason Princess Margaret remains such a compelling historical figure is because her life marked the beginning of a new chapter for the British royal family. Before her generation, many royal emotions remained hidden from public view. Newspapers reported official ceremonies, state visits, and formal celebrations. But private struggles rarely became international conversations. By the middle of the 20th century, however, television and modern journalism transformed the relationship between the monarchy and the public. Suddenly, people wanted to know not only what the royal family did, but also how they felt. Margaret found herself living through this enormous cultural change. Every smile, every vacation, every friendship, and every rumour could spread across the world within days. She became one of the first royals to experience the pressures of modern celebrity while still carrying the responsibilities of an ancient institution. That combination created challenges no previous generation had fully faced. Looking back today, historians often describe her as a bridge between the old monarchy and the modern royal family. The expectations placed upon her were rooted in centuries of tradition, yet the society surrounding her increasingly valued personal choice and individual happiness. This conflict shaped nearly every important decision she made. Even when she wished to step away from public attention, duty continued calling her back to official engagements, charitable events, diplomatic receptions, and national celebrations. She fulfilled these responsibilities year after year because she believed service remained an important part of her role, regardless of personal disappointment. Many people who attended those events later remembered her remarkable elegance. She possessed natural confidence, spoke with warmth, and carried herself with the dignity expected of a princess. Yet those closest to her understood that elegance did not mean life had been easy. Like everyone else, she experienced moments of doubt, regret, hope, and resilience. Perhaps that is why her story feels so timeless. Across different countries and generations, people recognise the universal emotions hidden beneath the royal titles. They understand the pain of impossible choices, the longing for genuine love, and the desire to live according to one's own heart. Princess Margaret reminds us that history is filled with individuals who appeared extraordinary from the outside while remaining deeply human within. Long after the royal processions ended and the newspaper headlines faded into archives, her life continues encouraging us to look beyond appearances and remember that even those born into the grandest palaces still searched for the same simple things that people everywhere continue seeking today: acceptance, purpose, lasting affection, and a place where they could truly feel at peace. Although Princess Margaret's life ended many years ago, her influence can still be felt. Whenever people discuss the balance between personal freedom and public responsibility, modern members of the royal family have often been given choices that simply did not exist during Margaret's youth. Society gradually became more accepting of divorce, different family structures, and the idea that even those born into royalty deserved the chance to pursue personal happiness. In many ways, Margaret belonged to a generation that absorbed the hardships of old traditions while helping pave the way for future change. She may never have intended to become a symbol of transformation, yet history often chooses its symbols unexpectedly. Her experiences encouraged countless historians, writers, and filmmakers to re-examine what life inside the monarchy truly looked like beyond official portraits. They discovered a woman who was intelligent, independent, emotionally complex, and determined to remain true to herself despite enormous expectations. She was not perfect, and perhaps that is exactly why so many people continue finding her story relatable. She made mistakes, experienced disappointments, enjoyed moments of great happiness, and struggled through painful chapters just like countless ordinary people. The difference was that nearly every chapter unfolded beneath the watchful eyes of the entire world. Every success was celebrated publicly, while every failure became international news. Few people could have carried such pressure without feeling its weight. As we reflect on Margaret's remarkable journey, it becomes clear that history should never reduce someone's life to a handful of famous headlines. Her romances, glamorous parties, and royal appearances formed only part of a much larger story. Beneath those well-known moments existed years of quiet service, deep friendships, private conversations, family loyalty, and personal resilience that rarely attracted newspaper attention. Those unseen moments often reveal far more about a person's character than the events remembered by history books. Princess Margaret reminds us that every historical figure possessed an inner world, invisible to the public. We may know the dates of important events, but we can only imagine the emotions surrounding them. That mystery is part of what keeps history alive, rather than offering simple heroes or villains. It introduces us to real people whose lives were shaped by circumstances, traditions, and choices unique to their own time. Margaret's story invites us to replace quick judgments with understanding and curiosity. When we do, the glittering image of a princess slowly transforms into something much more meaningfuler. Portrait of a woman who spent her life navigating extraordinary privilege alongside extraordinary sacrifice, leaving behind a legacy that continues to inspire thoughtful conversations. Long after the final royal ceremony came to an end, perhaps the greatest reason Princess Margaret's story continues to endure is because it reminds us that history is ultimately about people, rather than palaces. Buildings, crowns, and ceremonies may survive for centuries, but it is human emotion that gives the past its meaning. When we look at old photographs of Margaret smiling beside members of the royal family, it is easy to assume we understand everything about that moment. In reality, a A single photograph can never capture the hopes, worries, memories, or private thoughts hidden behind a smile. Historians spend years studying letters, interviews, diaries, and official records because they know every life contains layers that cannot be seen at first glance. Margaret's life illustrates this perfectly. She could attend a magnificent state banquet one evening and quietly reflect on painful memories. The next morning, she could receive admiration from thousands of strangers while missing their comfort of ordinary conversations with the people she loved most. This contrast between public image and private reality makes her story feel surprisingly familiar even today. Modern life often encourages people to present only their happiest moments, while quietly carrying invisible challenges of their own. In Setzenser, Princess Margaret's experience feels remarkably timeless. She teaches us not to assume that success, wealth, or recognition automatically create lasting happiness. Instead, fulfillment often depends upon relationships, freedom, and the ability to make meaningful choices. As the years continue passing, younger generations discover her story through books, documentaries, and historical dramas, each finding something different to admire or reflect upon. Some appreciate her courage in difficult circumstances. Others admire her personality and wit, while many simply become fascinated by the unique world she inhabited. Yet nearly everyone reaches the same realization before the story ends. Princess Margaret was never merely a glamorous royal figure decorating history books. She was a daughter, a sister, a mother, a friend, and a woman whose life unfolded beneath extraordinary expectations that very few people could truly understand. Her journey encourages us to approach history with empathy rather than assumptions, recognizing that every famous name belonged to someone who laughed, worried, dreamed, and hoped just as people do today. In the quiet passage of time, crowns lose their shine, newspaper headlines fade into archives, and royal ceremonies become distant memories. What remains is the enduring human story of someone who searched for love, purpose, and peace while carrying responsibilities that could never simply be set aside. That is why Princess Margaret continues to be remembered, not only as a Princess of Britain, but as one of history's most deeply human royal figures, whose life still invites us to look beyond appearances and discover the person hidden behind the title. In the end, Princess Margaret's story offers something far more valuable than a glimpse into royal luxury. It offers perspective. It reminds us that every generation faces its own invisible expectations, and that true happiness is often more complicated than it appears from the outside. Throughout her life, Margaret lived in some of the most famous residences in the world, travelled with extraordinary privilege, and met presidents, artists, actors, and world leaders. Yet the moments historians remember most are not the glittering banquets or elegant receptions. Instead, they remember the difficult choices she faced, the relationships she treasured, and the quiet determination with which she continued carrying out her duties despite personal disappointments. That contrast has become the lasting heart of her legacy. When visitors tour royal palaces today, they often admire the magnificent rooms without realizing that behind those beautifully decorated walls lived people whose emotions were every bit as real as their own. Joy echoed through those corridors, but so did heartbreak, uncertainty, and hope. Princess Margaret experienced all of them. She laughed with close friends, celebrated family milestones, mourned personal losses, and gradually accepted that some dreams simply belonged to another life she could never fully live. There is something deeply human in that realization. Most people, regardless of where they are born, eventually discover that life rarely follows the exact path imagined during childhood. Margaret's circumstances were extraordinary, but her emotions were universal. That is why her story continues speaking to audiences around the world. It encourages us to judge historical figures with kindness instead of perfection, understanding that they lived within the customs and limitations of their own time. Looking back from the present, it is easy to imagine different outcomes, but history cannot be rewritten. It can only be understood. Princess Margaret's journey teaches us that compassion is one of the most valuable tools a historian can possess. Behind every famous portrait stands an individual with fears, hopes, mistakes, and dreams that rarely appear in official records. By remembering that truth, we move beyond the glitter of royal titles and discover something far more meaningful: the shared human experience connecting the past with the present. And perhaps that is why Princess Margaret's life continues to be remembered so vividly. Not because she lived in palaces or wore priceless jewels, but because beneath every royal tradition and every public ceremony was a woman searching for the same things people have always searched for: love, understanding, purpose, and a quiet place where she could simply be herself. As time continues to pass, Princess Margaret's life has become more than a chapter in royal history. It has become a reminder that even the most privileged lives are shaped by choices, circumstances, and moments that cannot always be controlled. Historians no longer study her only because she was the sister of a queen. They study her because her experiences reveal how tradition can influence an individual's entire future. Every generation of the royal family has faced different expectations, but Margaret belonged to a period when personal sacrifice was considered one of the highest forms of service. She accepted responsibilities that she had never chosen, simply because they were attached to the family into which she was born. That sense of duty remained with her throughout her life, even during moments when it came at great personal cost. Today, many visitors to museums and royal exhibitions pause before photographs of Princess Margaret and notice her confident posture, elegant clothing, and unmistakable presence. Yet those images represent only a tiny fraction of her story. They cannot show the difficult conversations held behind closed doors, the letters written in private, or the countless evenings spent reflecting on the path her life had taken. Those unseen moments are impossible to photograph, but they are often the moments that define a person most deeply. Margaret understood that history would remember her, although she could never have known exactly how. Decades after her passing, people continue discussing not only the events of her life, but also the emotions surrounding them. They wonder what she truly felt during life's biggest decisions and how different her future might have been if she had been born in another era. While those questions can never be answered completely, They encourage us to think carefully about the relationship between duty and happiness. Every historical figure leaves behind facts, but only a few leave behind questions that continue, inspiring reflection long after they are gone. Princess Margaret is one of those rare individuals. Her life reminds us that history is not simply a timeline of dates and ceremonies. It is a collection of deeply personal stories connected by universal emotions that remain unchanged across generations. Love, hope, disappointment, courage, and resilience belong to every era. They existed inside royal palaces just as surely as they existed in ordinary homes. By understanding Margaret's journey, we gain not only a clearer picture of the British monarchy, but also a greater appreciation for the complexity of human life itself. That quiet understanding is perhaps the greatest gift history can offer, inviting us to look beyond titles and traditions and remember the person whose heart continued beating beneath every royal crown and ceremonial gown. There is another reason historians continue returning to Princess Margaret's story. Her life encourages us to separate myths from reality. Popular culture often presents royalty as if every day were filled with celebrations, beautiful clothes, and endless comfort. The historical record paints a far more balanced picture. Royal life demanded discipline from morning until night. Official schedules were carefully organised. Speeches were prepared in advance. Security surrounded nearly every journey, and public appearances required constant attention to etiquette. Even simple family gatherings could become matters of national interest. Margaret learned from an early age that almost nothing in her life would remain entirely private. That reality shaped her character in ways that outsiders could rarely understand. Despite everything she experienced, she remained deeply connected to the institution she represented. She understood that the monarchy existed not only because of crowns and ceremonies, but because each generation accepted responsibilities that extended beyond personal wishes, whether attending charity events, welcoming international visitors, or supporting cultural organisations. Margaret continued performing her duties with grace even when her personal life attracted criticism. Many people who worked with her later remembered her professionalism and generosity, describing someone who treated staff with warmth and appreciated the efforts of those around her. These quieter acts of kindness rarely appeared in newspaper headlines, yet they formed an important part of her legacy. History often focuses on dramatic events, but character is usually revealed through small everyday actions. As modern audiences revisit her life, they often discover a woman far more complex than the glamorous image that once dominated magazine covers. She could be witty, thoughtful, stubborn, compassionate, and fiercely loyal all at once. Like every human being, she possessed strengths as well as imperfections, making her story feel authentic rather than idealized. Perhaps that authenticity explains why interest in her life has never disappeared. Each generation views her through a slightly different perspective, yet the central message remains unchanged. Titles may influence a person's responsibilities, but they do not erase ordinary human emotions. Behind every royal title stood an individual searching for meaning, companionship, and acceptance. Princess Margaret's journey reminds us that History becomes most meaningful when we move beyond famous names and begin understanding the people themselves. Her story is not simply about Britain's royal family. It is about resilience in the face of disappointment, dignity during public scrutiny, and the quiet courage required to continue fulfilling one's responsibilities, even when life unfolds differently than expected. Those timeless lessons ensure that Princess Margaret will continue to be remembered not only as a princess, but as a remarkably human figure whose experiences still speak to readers around the world. When we quietly step back and look at Princess Margaret's life as a whole, it becomes clear that her story was never simply about royalty. It was about living under expectations that very few people could truly imagine. Every important chapter of her life unfolded before millions of watching eyes. The choices she made, the friendships she formed, the places she visited, and even the expressions on her face were discussed by newspapers and television broadcasters across the world. That level of attention could easily make anyone feel isolated, no matter how many people surrounded them. Yet Margaret continued moving forward, fulfilling her public role while carrying private memories that belonged only to her. She understood that history would remember the ceremonies, the state banquets, and the famous photographs. But she also knew that the quiet moments between those events often carried the greatest emotional weight. Those moments were shared only with trusted friends and close family members, far away from cameras and official speeches. It is within those unseen moments that historians often discover the true person behind the royal title. Margaret loved laughter, beautiful music, thoughtful conversation, and the company of people who treated her as an individual rather than simply as a princess. She appreciated honesty and intelligence, and many who spent time with her remembered her sharp wit long after their meetings had ended. Although public attention sometimes focused on controversy, those closest to her often described someone capable of remarkable kindness and generosity. Like everyone else, she possessed qualities that could not be fully captured by headlines. This is why history continues returning to her story again and again. It reminds us that no life should be judged only by its most famous moments. Every person is far more complicated than a handful of photographs or newspaper articles can ever reveal. Princess Margaret's journey encourages us to slow down, look beyond appearances, and appreciate the human experiences hidden beneath official history. The palaces still stand, the portraits still hang upon their walls, and visitors continue admiring the symbols of royalty. Yet, perhaps the most meaningful part of Margaret's legacy cannot be displayed inside a museum. It lives in the understanding that privilege and hardship can exist together, that strength often appears quietly rather than dramatically, and that every historical figure deserves to be remembered not only for the title they carried, but also for the humanity they never lost. That quiet truth continues giving Princess Margaret's story its lasting place in history, allowing each new generation to discover not simply a princess, but a woman whose life reflected both the beauty and the burden of living beneath a crown. Perhaps the most enduring part of Princess Margaret's legacy is the quiet reminder that history is never as simple as it first appears. When we read about kings, queens, princes, and princesses, it is tempting to imagine their lives as completely different from our own. Yet the closer historians examine their letters, conversations, and daily routines, the more familiar they become. They worried about family, treasured lasting friendships, searched for love, and wondered whether they had made the right decisions. Princess Margaret was no exception, although she lived within one of the most famous royal families in the world. The questions she faced were deeply human. Could duty and happiness exist together? Could public responsibility ever leave enough room for a private life? Could someone born into extraordinary privilege still long for ordinary freedom? These questions remain just as meaningful today as they were during her lifetime. In many respects, Margaret's story has become a reflection of the changing 20th century itself. She witnessed a Britain that transformed from old traditions into a more modern society, where public expectations gradually shifted and the monarchy slowly adapted to a new world. Through every change, she remained a recognisable figure whose life reflected both the strengths and the limitations of the institution she served. She did not change history through military victories or political speeches. Instead, she changed the way many people thought about the human side of royalty. Her experiences encouraged future generations to see members of the royal family not as distant symbols, but as individuals living under extraordinary pressure. That understanding continues shaping how historians write about the monarchy today, rather than focusing only on ceremonies and official events. They increasingly explore the emotions, relationships, and personal sacrifices hidden behind royal traditions. Princess Margaret's journey played an important role in that shift. It reminds us that even the grandest historical institutions are ultimately made up of ordinary people, asked to carry extraordinary responsibilities. Long after the final newspaper stories faded and the celebrations became memories, what remained was not simply the image of a glamorous princess, but the lasting portrait of a woman whose life reflected courage, vulnerability, elegance, disappointment, resilience, and hope. Those qualities continue speaking across generations because they belong not only to royalty but to humanity itself. And as we close another chapter of her remarkable journey, we are left with a gentle understanding that the greatest stories in history are rarely about power alone. They are about the people who lived behind the titles, whose dreams, sacrifices, and quiet determination continue inspiring us long after their own voices have fallen silent. Even now, more than 2 decades after Princess Margaret's passing, historians continue uncovering small details that help complete the picture of her remarkable life. Newly released letters, interviews with former palace staff, and recollections from friends have shown that she was often far more thoughtful and reflective than her glamorous public image suggested. She enjoyed discussing literature, admired talented musicians and painters, and followed cultural events with genuine curiosity. Although newspapers frequently focused on dramatic stories because they attracted attention, those who knew her personally often described a far more balanced individual. They remembered someone who could be deeply loyal to close friends, wonderfully entertaining at dinner, and surprisingly compassionate toward people facing difficult circumstances. Margaret understood that public attention rarely rewarded ordinary kindness, because quiet acts of generosity seldom became headlines. Yet throughout her life, she continued supporting charities, hospitals, artistic organisations, and countless public causes without expecting constant recognition. These quieter contributions became an important part of her lasting legacy. As historians compare Margaret's era with the modern royal family, the differences become striking. Today's members of the monarchy enjoy opportunities to communicate directly with the public, explain charitable work, and sometimes share carefully chosen moments from their private lives. During Margaret's youth, however, distance and mystery remained central parts of royal tradition. Silence was often considered more appropriate than explanation. This meant misunderstandings could last for years because there were very few opportunities to clarify rumours or correct false impressions. Margaret lived through that challenging environment with remarkable resilience, even when criticism became painful. Looking back now, many experts believe she helped reveal the emotional cost of maintaining such strict traditions in a rapidly changing world. Her experiences quietly influenced future discussions about how the monarchy should balance privacy with openness and tradition with compassion. Perhaps she never imagined that her personal journey would contribute to those conversations. Yet history often assigns importance long after events have passed. That is one of the fascinating qualities of studying the past. Individual lives frequently shape future generations in unexpected ways. Princess Margaret's story reminds us that historical influence is not measured only through political decisions or famous speeches. Sometimes influence grows through courage shown during deeply personal struggles that allow later generations to see old institutions with fresh understanding. As we continue reflecting on her life, one truth remains constant. Behind every royal title stood a woman who laughed, cried, hoped, regretted, forgave, and continued moving forward despite disappointments that would have overwhelmed many others. That enduring humanity is what keeps her memory alive, ensuring that Princess Margaret will always be remembered, not only as a member of Britain's royal family, but also as one of its most fascinating and deeply relatable figures. As Princess Margaret's story continues to be retold, it reminds us of something that every historian eventually discovers. Time has a remarkable way of softening judgment and deepening understanding. During her lifetime, many people knew her only through newspaper headlines, brief television appearances, or photographs taken during official engagements. Those snapshots captured moments, but they could never explain an entire life. Decades later, with the benefit of historical distance, researchers have been able to look beyond the sensational stories and appreciate the full complexity of the woman herself. They see someone who lived through enormous social change while remaining connected to traditions that had existed for centuries. She witnessed Britain recover from war, watched technology transform everyday life, and observed the monarchy adapting to a rapidly changing society. Through every stage of those changes, Margaret remained part of one of the world's most recognisable families, carrying responsibilities that few people could fully imagine. Although she sometimes struggled beneath those expectations, she never completely abandoned her commitment to public service, even when her health declined and official appearances became more difficult. She continued supporting charitable organisations and fulfilling as many engagements as possible. Those quiet acts of dedication rarely received the same attention as dramatic headlines, yet they reflected an important side of her character. Friends often recalled that she possessed remarkable determination, refusing to allow personal difficulties to define her entire life. She understood that disappointment was only one chapter in a much larger story. That perspective gives her life a lasting sense of balance. She experienced extraordinary privilege alongside genuine hardship, public admiration alongside painful criticism, and unforgettable celebrations alongside deeply private sorrow. Such contrasts remind us that no person's life can ever be reduced to a single label. Princess Margaret was not simply a glamorous royal, nor merely a tragic figure. She was both strong and vulnerable, confident and uncertain, joyful and reflective, just as most human beings are at different moments in their lives. Perhaps this is why audiences continue returning to her story, generation after generation. They recognise pieces of themselves within experiences that at first seem completely distant. Beneath the crowns, palace walls, and formal ceremonies lies a timeless human journey shaped by love, sacrifice, resilience, and hope. History preserves her name because of her royal birth, but it preserves her memory because of her humanity, long after the jewels have been locked away and the grand processions have ended. That humanity remains the most valuable part of Princess Margaret's remarkable legacy, quietly reminding us that behind every famous title is a life filled with dreams, disappointments, courage, and the universal desire to find happiness despite circumstances beyond one's control. If there is one final lesson that quietly emerges from Princess Margaret's remarkable journey, it is that history becomes most meaningful when it helps us better understand ourselves. We often look toward the past expecting to find stories about distant people living completely different lives. Yet the closer we examine those lives, the more familiar they become. Princess Margaret experienced hope, disappointment, excitement, loneliness, affection, regret, and resilience, just as people continue to experience them today. The surroundings were extraordinary, but the emotions remained timeless. Her life unfolded inside magnificent palaces, decorated with priceless paintings and centuries of royal tradition. Yet no amount of luxury could shield anyone from heartbreak or uncertainty. That simple truth explains why her story continues touching readers across generations. It reminds us that happiness cannot be measured by titles, wealth, or public admiration alone. Instead, it often depends upon meaningful relationships, personal freedom, and the ability to remain true to oneself despite difficult circumstances. Margaret spent her life balancing those ideals against responsibilities she had inherited rather than chosen. She did so with dignity, even when the path before her became painful. Looking back today, it is easy to focus only on famous events. But history is built just as much from quiet moments as grand occasions. A thoughtful conversation shared with a trusted friend, a peaceful afternoon away from cameras, or a letter written from the heart can reveal more about a person's character than any state banquet ever could. Those unseen moments formed the true foundation of Margaret's life. They remind us that every historical figure possessed a private world invisible to the crowds who admired them. Perhaps that is why Princess Margaret remains such an unforgettable figure. She encourages us to look beyond appearances and remember that every portrait hides a far richer story than first meets the eye. The royal uniforms, glittering jewels, and formal ceremonies belong to her public role. But kindness, humour, determination, and vulnerability belong to the woman herself. Those qualities cannot be displayed inside museum cases. Yet they are the very qualities that allow her memory to endure. As long as people continue searching the past for wisdom about the human experience, Princess Margaret's story will remain relevant. It stands as a gentle reminder that history is never simply about crowns or castles. It is about ordinary emotions lived under extraordinary circumstances, proving once again that behind every famous name is a human heart capable of dreaming, loving, enduring hardship, and hoping for a brighter tomorrow. Just like every generation that follows. As we spend more time exploring the past, it becomes clear that Princess Margaret's life cannot be understood through a single event or decision. It was a journey filled with triumphs and disappointments, moments of celebration and periods of quiet reflection. Every stage of her life revealed a different side of her personality. As a young princess, she captured attention with her confidence and charm. As a woman, she searched for love and independence while carrying responsibilities few people could imagine. In later years, she became a symbol of an era that was slowly disappearing. Watching the monarchy transform before her eyes, Britain itself changed dramatically during her lifetime, and Margaret experienced those changes from one of the most unique positions in the country. She witnessed traditions that had remained unchanged for generations begin adapting to the modern world. Some changes arrived too late to alter her own path, but they ensured that future generations of the royal family would face different opportunities and challenges. Historians often reflect on this irony. Although Margaret could not escape many of the restrictions placed upon her, her experiences helped inspire conversations that eventually reshaped the institution. She had spent her entire life serving. That quiet influence became one of her greatest contributions to history. It was not achieved through speeches or political power, but through the simple reality of a life lived honestly beneath extraordinary pressure. Today, when people visit royal residences or read biographies about the British monarchy, they often pause longest when Margaret's story is told. Perhaps they recognise something universal within it. They understand the feeling of wondering what life might have been if one important decision had been different. They understand the weight of family expectations, the difficulty of balancing responsibility with personal happiness, and the courage required to keep moving forward after disappointment. Those emotions belong to every generation, making Margaret's story feel surprisingly close despite the royal setting. In the end, Her legacy extends far beyond elegant dresses, famous photographs, and palace ceremonies. She reminds us that history is not preserved because people were perfect. It is preserved because their lives reveal enduring truths about courage, sacrifice, resilience, and hope. Long after the applause faded from royal celebrations and the newspaper headlines became old archives, Princess Margaret's greatest legacy remained the same. She showed that beneath every title, every tradition, and every symbol of power exists a human being whose greatest victories and deepest struggles are often invisible to the world. That quiet understanding continues to make her life one of the most moving and unforgettable stories in modern royal history. When future generations look back on the 20th century, Princess Margaret will likely continue to stand as one of its most fascinating royal figures because her life reflected the changing relationship between tradition and modern society. She belonged to a world where duty was considered sacred, yet she also witnessed a new era in which people increasingly believed that personal happiness deserved equal importance. Living between those two ideas was never easy. Every decision carried consequences not only for herself, but also for the reputation of the monarchy. That responsibility followed her throughout every stage of life, becoming a permanent companion that could never simply be left behind. Even during quiet moments away from official engagements, Margaret understood that she represented something much larger than herself. Yet despite these enormous expectations, she never stopped appreciating beauty in everyday life. She enjoyed listening to music, spending time with trusted friends, admiring works of art, and sharing laughter whenever the opportunity arose. Those simple pleasures offered moments of peace inside a life that often demanded constant self-control. People who met her privately frequently recalled her intelligence, quick humour, and ability to make formal gatherings feel surprisingly warm. Such memories remind us that the real person was always far more complex than the public image presented through newspapers. This is one of the greatest challenges historians face. Official records preserve dates, ceremonies, and speeches, but they rarely capture personality. Fortunately, letters, interviews, memoirs, and personal recollections allow us to glimpse the individual hidden behind the title. Through those sources, Princess Margaret appears not as a distant royal icon, but as someone who faced uncertainty with courage and continued fulfilling her responsibilities. Despite personal disappointment, perhaps that quiet determination explains why interest in her story has never disappeared. Readers recognise that true strength does not always appear through dramatic acts. Sometimes it is found in the decision to continue moving forward, to keep smiling in public while carrying private burdens, and to remain loyal to one's responsibilities even when life feels unfair. Margaret demonstrated that kind of resilience throughout her life. Her journey encourages us to remember that history is ultimately a collection of human experiences, rather than simply a record of famous names. Behind every palace window, every royal portrait, and every ceremonial procession lived individuals with hopes, fears, and dreams remarkably similar to our own. Princess Margaret's life gently reminds us that while titles may shape a person's responsibilities, they can never change the universal emotions that connect every generation across history. That enduring humanity remains the true reason her story continues to be remembered with such curiosity, respect, and quiet reflection all around the world. As historians continue examining Princess Margaret's legacy, one idea appears again and again. Her life was not extraordinary because she lived inside palaces. It was extraordinary because she remained human while living in circumstances that often demanded perfection. Every generation of the royal family has faced challenges, but Margaret experienced them during a period when expectations were changing faster than the monarchy itself. She belonged to an institution built upon centuries of tradition, yet the world outside palace walls was embracing new ideas about freedom, equality, and individual choice. That contrast shaped nearly every important chapter of her life. Looking back today, it becomes easier to understand why so many people continue feeling sympathy for her story. She never asked to become a symbol of royal duty, nor did she choose the responsibilities that accompanied her birth. Those responsibilities simply became part of her identity from the very beginning. Even so, she fulfilled countless public engagements, welcomed distinguished visitors, supported charitable organisations, and represented Britain with dignity for decades. These achievements are sometimes overshadowed by discussions of her personal relationships, yet they formed an essential part of her contribution to public life. Thousands of people met Princess Margaret during official visits and remembered her warmth, curiosity, and genuine interest in the people she encountered. Those brief meetings rarely became famous historical moments, but they left lasting impressions on individuals who never forgot them. History is often built from such quiet encounters rather than dramatic headlines. Margaret understood this better than most. She knew that service was measured, not only by grand ceremonies but also by countless ordinary acts, carried out with patience and grace. As time passt public grevesoffend. Many people who had once judged her choices began viewing them through a more compassionate lens, recognizing how limited her options had truly been. This shift reminds us that history is constantly evolving. New generations ask different questions, examine familiar stories from fresh perspectives, and often discover greater understanding than those living through the events themselves. Princess Margaret's life benefits from that deeper reflection, rather than remembering only the glamour or the controversy. Modern audiences increasingly appreciate the resilience that carried her through decades of public attention and personal sacrifice. Her journey quietly teaches us that real strength is not found in never facing hardship, but in continuing to fulfill one's responsibilities despite disappointment. That lesson reaches far beyond the walls of Buckingham Palace, speaking to anyone who has ever balanced duty with personal dreams. It is this timeless message, more than any royal title or famous photograph, that ensures Princess Margaret's story continues to hold an important place in history. Yet, perhaps the most meaningful way to remember Princess Margaret is not through the difficult chapters of her life, but through the quiet resilience she showed in facing them. History rarely grants anyone a perfect life, and Margaret's story reminds you as that even those surrounded by privilege must confront disappointment, loss, and the passing of time. She continued fulfilling her responsibilities while the world around her changed, watching new generations reshape both Britain and the monarchy she had served since childhood. Today, visitors still admire the royal palaces, sparkling crowns, and magnificent portraits connected to her name. But the greatest part of her legacy cannot be displayed behind glass. It lives in the lessons her life continues to teach. She reminds us that compassion is often more valuable than judgment, that every famous person carries private struggles invisible to the public, and that history becomes richer when we remember the people behind the titles. Princess Margaret's journey was filled with elegance, heartbreak, laughter, duty, and perseverance, making her one of the most unforgettable members of the modern royal family. As we quietly leave her story behind, we are reminded that the past is not merely a collection of dates and ceremonies. It is a tapestry woven from real lives, real emotions and real choices. Long after the royal processions ended and the headlines faded into history, the memory of Princess Margaret endured because she represented something universal. She showed that no amount of wealth or status can replace love, freedom, or genuine human connection. In the end, perhaps that is why her story still resonates today. It is not simply the story of a princess. It is the story of a woman who lived beneath extraordinary expectations, while searching for the same happiness, peace, and purpose that people in every generation continue seeking. And with that gentle reflection, we close the final chapter of Princess Margaret's remarkable journey, leaving her story where our great history belongs in our memory, not only as a royal figure, but as a deeply human one whose life continues to inspire quiet reflection. As the years continue to pass, Princess Margaret's story grows, even more valuable because it encourages us to view history with empathy instead of assumption. It is easy to believe that people born into extraordinary privilege must have lived extraordinary happiness. But Margaret's life gently proves otherwise. The grand palaces, elegant gowns, royal banquets, and priceless jewels formed only the setting of her story. They were never the story itself. The real story was written through quiet decisions, personal sacrifices, lasting friendships, and the determination to fulfill responsibilities. Even when life became painfully complicated, every generation discovers something different in her journey. Some admire her confidence and sense of style. Others are moved by the love she could never fully pursue, while many simply recognize the universal struggle between duty and personal happiness. That is what gives her life such lasting importance. Historical figures remain relevant not because they were flawless, but because they reveal emotions that continue to exist centuries later. Margaret laughed, worried, hoped, doubted, celebrated, and grieved just as people do today. The difference was that she experienced these moments beneath the constant attention of the entire world. Few individuals could have carried such responsibility without feeling its weight. Yet despite public criticism and private disappointment, she continued representing the crown with grace throughout much of her life. Modern historians increasingly agree that her legacy deserves to be understood with balance, rather than sensationalism. She was neither a perfect princess nor a tragic heroine. She was a complex human being whose strengths and weaknesses existed side by side. That complexity is exactly what makes her story so compelling. It reminds us that history is rarely divided into simple categories of success or failure. Instead, it is filled with individuals doing the best they can within their circumstances they inherit. Princess Margaret never chose the century into which she was born, nor the traditions she was expected to uphold. She simply lived the life placed before her with courage, dignity, and resilience. Long after the royal ceremonies ended and the palace lights grew quiet, those qualities became the true foundation of her legacy. Today, when readers look beyond the glamour and examine her life with patience, they discover something far more meaningful than another royal biography. They discover a timeless reminder that beneath every famous name is an ordinary, human heart, and that understanding the past begins not with judging those who lived it, but with trying to understand the world as they experienced it. Perhaps the greatest achievement of Princess Margaret's story is that it encourages us to look beyond appearances. History often preserves the most glamorous photographs, the grandest ceremonies, and the most dramatic headlines. But those moments represent only a small fraction of a person's life. Between every official engagement existed countless ordinary days filled with quiet conversations, personal reflections, family gatherings, and moments of simple happiness or disappointment. Those everyday experiences shaped Margaret just as much as the famous events remembered by history books. She understood that public admiration could appear and disappear with surprising speed. But character was built through the choices made when no cameras were present. Friends who spent time with her away from official duties frequently remembered her laughter, her sharp sense of humour, and her genuine appreciation for music, art, and intelligent conversation. They described someone who enjoyed making others feel comfortable, despite the formality that surrounded royal life. These personal memories reveal a woman far richer than the public image many people believed they knew. As historians continue exploring the archives, they increasingly emphasize this more complete portrait, rather than focusing only on royal protocol or family drama. They examine Margaret as an individual shaped by her generation, her upbringing, and the extraordinary expectations placed upon her from childhood. That approach allows modern readers to appreciate not only what happened in her life, but also why those events mattered so deeply. Every difficult decision reflected the values of the time in which she lived. Every sacrifice demonstrated the enormous responsibility carried by senior members of the monarchy. Looking back with today's perspective, it is tempting to imagine easier solutions. Yet history asks us to understand rather than simply judge. Princess Margaret's journey reminds us that people cannot be separated from the era that shaped them. They lived according to customs, beliefs, and responsibilities that often differed greatly from our own. By recognizing this, we gain something far more valuable than facts alone. We gain empathy. That empathy transforms history from a list of dates into a collection of deeply human experiences. Princess Margaret's life continues inspiring readers because it reflects the timeless struggle between personal dreams and public duty, between individual freedom and lifelong responsibility. Those themes remain as meaningful today as they were during her lifetime, ensuring that her remarkable story will continue to be read, discussed, and remembered for generations to come, not merely as the life of a princess, but as the unforgettable journey of a woman whose humanity outshone even the grandeur of the crown. As historians revisit Princess Margaret's life, they often conclude that her greatest contribution was not changing the monarchy overnight, but revealing the emotional reality behind royal tradition. Before her generation, many people imagined members of the royal family as distant figures who existed almost outside ordinary human experience. Margaret's story quietly challenged that belief. Through her joys, disappointments, and personal struggles, the public gradually began to recognize that royal titles could never erase human emotions. This realization helped transform the way future generations viewed the monarchy. Instead of seeing only crowns and ceremonies, people became more interested in the individuals wearing them. Margaret's life became an important part of that shift. She represented an era when the royal family stood at the crossroads between centuries-old customs and a rapidly modernizing society. Every important decision reflected that tension. While she respected the institution she belonged to, she also experienced the frustrations that came from living within its strict expectations. Yet she never allowed those frustrations to completely define her. Those who worked beside her continued describing a woman who valued loyalty, appreciated beauty, and possessed an unmistakable sense of humour. Even during difficult periods, she remained capable of bringing warmth into formal occasions with a clever remark or a genuine smile. These memories remind us that personality often survives longer than headlines. Time has a way of stripping away sensational stories while preserving qualities that truly mattered. Decades after her passing, historians are less interested in gossip and far more interested in understanding the remarkable person she was. They see someone who lived through extraordinary circumstances without ever losing the ordinary emotions that connected her to everyone else. That perspective gives her story lasting power. Princess Margaret's journey reminds us that history is not built only by rulers who changed governments or won battles. It is also shaped by individuals whose lives help us understand the emotional cost of tradition, responsibility, and public service. Her experiences continue encouraging readers to approach the past with patience and compassion, recognizing that every historical figure faced challenges unique to their own time. In the end, perhaps that is why Princess Margaret remains unforgettable. She showed that true strength is not measured by the crown resting upon someone's head, but by the quiet courage required to continue moving forward while carrying burdens the world could rarely see. That timeless lesson ensures her story will remain meaningful long into the future, inviting every new generation to discover the remarkable woman behind one of history's most famous royal titles. The passing of time has given historians the opportunity to see Princess Margaret with greater fairness than many people did. During her lifetime, news stories often focused on dramatic moments because they attracted readers. But history has the advantage of looking at an entire life instead of our single headline. When all the pieces are placed together, a far richer picture begins to appear. Margaret was not defined by one romance, one marriage, or one controversy. She was a daughter devoted to her parents, a loving sister who supported Queen Elizabeth II throughout decades of enormous responsibility, a mother who cared deeply for her children, and a public figure who represented Britain across countless official occasions. These different roles existed simultaneously, making her life far more complex than the simplified version often presented by popular culture. She understood that history would remember the visible moments. Yet much of her greatest strength appeared during ordinary days when cameras were absent and no audience was watching. Quiet determination rarely becomes front-page news, but it often shapes a person's true character. Those who spent years working alongside. Margaret consistently described someone who remained deeply interested in people, enjoyed meaningful conversation, and possessed an ability to make formal settings feel surprisingly relaxed. Her humour became one of her defining qualities, helping her navigate situations that might otherwise have felt overwhelming. As Britain entered the 21st century, the monarchy itself continued evolving, adopting a more open relationship with the public than had existed during Margaret's youth. Back. Many historians now believe that stories like hers helped encourage that gradual transformation. They revealed the importance of allowing people to see not only royal ceremony, but also the humanity behind it. Princess Margaret, therefore, occupies a unique place in history. She belonged to the final generation, raised almost entirely within the old traditions while witnessing the first steps toward a more modern monarchy. Few individuals experienced such a dramatic shift from inside the institution itself. Her journey offers valuable insight into how even the oldest traditions must eventually respond to changing societies. More importantly, it reminds us that every historical era is lived by real people who cannot foresee how future generations will judge them. Margaret simply lived according to the expectations of her own time, doing her best within circumstances she never chose. That quiet truth continues giving her story remarkable emotional depth, ensuring that long after the royal ceremonies have faded into history, the woman behind the title remains unforgettable to readers, seeking not only facts about the past, but also wisdom about the enduring nature of the human experience. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of Princess Margaret's legacy is that it continues to encourage thoughtful discussion rather than simple conclusions. Some people see her as a woman limited by tradition, while others admire the dignity with which she accepted responsibilities that few could imagine carrying. Both perspectives reveal important truths because history is rarely one-sided. Real lives are filled with contradictions, and Margaret's life reflected that reality. She could appear confident before thousands of spectators while privately questioning the direction of her own future. she could enjoy magnificent celebrations, while quietly longing for the ordinary freedom many people never even notice. These contrasts do not weaken her story. They make it more authentic. They remind us that happiness and sadness often exist together, even in lives that appear perfect from the outside. This understanding has changed the way modern historians write about royalty, rather than presenting kings and princesses as distant symbols. They increasingly focus on the individuals beneath the titles. Princess Margaret has become one of the clearest examples of this approach. Her life demonstrates that public duty often required enormous personal sacrifice, and that those sacrifices were not always visible during official ceremonies. As the decades pass, younger generations continue discovering her story through biographies, documentaries, and historical research. Many are surprised to learn how much her experiences still resonate today. Questions about balancing career and family, personal happiness and public expectations, or tradition and individual freedom remain relevant across every generation. Margaret's circumstances were unique, but the emotions she experienced remain universal. That is why her story refuses to fade with time. It speaks not only to those interested in royal history, but also to anyone who has ever struggled to reconcile personal dreams with responsibilities they could not easily escape. In many respects, Princess Margaret became an unexpected bridge between two different worlds. She preserved the elegance and discipline of an older monarchy while quietly revealing the emotional challenges hidden behind it. Without intending to do so, she helped future generations understand that strength is often expressed not through dramatic victories, but through quiet endurance. Looking back now, historians recognize that her greatest legacy is not contained within palace walls or royal collections. It survives in the lessons her life continues to offer about resilience, compassion, and the importance of seeing historical figures as complete human beings. Every generation that revisits her journey discovers something new, proving that the most enduring stories are those that continue, inviting reflection long after the final chapter has been written. And so, as our journey through Princess Margaret's life comes to a peaceful close, perhaps the greatest lesson she leaves behind has nothing to do with royalty at all. Her story reminds us that every human life is far more complicated than it first appears. We often see only the grand moments, the crowns, the palaces, the elegant gowns, the famous photographs, but history invites us to look deeper. Behind every royal portrait was a woman who loved deeply, laughed sincerely, made difficult choices, experienced disappointment, and continued moving forward, despite carrying burdens that few people could truly understand. Princess Margaret never ruled Britain, never wore the imperial state crown, and never sat upon the throne. Yet she left behind something equally meaningful, a story that continues to help people understand the human side of the monarchy. Her life teaches us that duty can demand sacrifice, that privilege does not guarantee happiness, and that kindness, resilience, and compassion often matter far more than status or wealth. As the decades pass, the newspaper headlines continue fading, the debates become quieter, and even the grand ceremonies become distant memories. But the lessons hidden within Margaret's journey remain timeless. They remind us not to judge people too quickly, because every life contains chapters the world never gets to read. History is filled with castles, kingdoms, and royal families. But what truly survives through thee? Centuries are thee, emotions that connect every generation. Love, hope, regret, courage, forgiveness, and the desire to find peace belong to every era, whether someone lives in a palace or in an ordinary home. Perhaps that is why Princess Margaret's story still captures the imagination of so many people around the world. It is not simply the biography of a princess. It is the story of a human being searching for meaning while carrying responsibilities she never chose, doing her best in a world that constantly expected perfection. And as the lights slowly fade on this remarkable chapter of history, we leave Princess Margaret where she now belongs, not only in the pages of history books, but also in our understanding of what it truly means to be human. Thank you for spending this quiet evening exploring the past with me. If you enjoyed this journey through history, don't forget to subscribe for more relaxing stories that uncover the hidden lives behind history's most fascinating people. Until next time, sleep well, take care, and let the echoes of history gently carry you into a peaceful night's rest.